Welcome everyone to our webinar. I'm very excited and happy to have Amr Salahieh with us today. Amr is our partner at Shifamed. He's the founder, he's the president and the CEO of Shifamed. Amr, welcome and thank you so much for being with us today.
Pleasure to be with you guys. Good morning from California and good afternoon for you guys in Europe. So let me just do a quick overview of myself and Shifamed. So Shifamed really is an entity that's focused around building medical device companies and really focused on the early stage of that building process. I came to the US in mid 80s and started working in 89 in Silicon Valley in the medical device industry. I studied biomedical engineering and electrical engineering from Case Western Reserve University in Cleveland, Ohio. And I've really been in this industry since then and been dedicated my life to this. I started at a company called ACS, which became Guidant Corporation. And then I joined a startup company called CTS. We went public in a very short period of time. And then I started my first company. And since then, we've sold 6 different companies. The last 4 are part of Shifamed, which is an innovation hub. And what we're dedicated to is really starting these companies from scratch and ultimately executing a transaction with the large corporations so they can take on what we've developed and commercialize it. So really, we focus on identifying an opportunity, developing the technology, getting to the clinic, showing the product value with patients and physicians, and going through a competitive bidding process by the large strategics in our industry, companies like Medtronic, Boston Scientific, Abbott, and so forth, and doing a transaction. What we like to do is transact, in 3 to 5 years from the initial investment, and continue to focus on this innovation cycle. What we do is rather specific. So we don't like to do a lot of science. We focus on engineering. So we like to reduce risk, and we like to scale what we've learned over and over again. So often what we do is identify an interesting opportunity, an interesting trend in the industry where the industry, the strategics, the corporate development people have sort of identified as the next exciting opportunity in the industry. And we get into it and identify a solution that is still missing from this early stage activities. And we try to leapfrog the pioneers in the industry. So the idea is that we focus on engineering execution and reduce the risk so that if there's a transaction that's taken place already, or there's an existing player that may be commercial, the other large players need a way to differentiate, a way to enter the market and get big market share. And we provide that solution. We provide for a differentiated innovation, patent protected solution that can really allow those companies to compete. And usually in the industry that we operate in, there's usually a number of competitors. We like to focus on areas where there's multiple potential buyers, and they often cannot afford to wait until a full approval and commercialization is taken place by a startup. They have to step in and acquire as soon as the evidence is there. And the evidence for us in our industry is the first anywhere from 10 to 100 patients. It is not a full FDA approval, because if they wait that long, we would be sold to another one of their competitors. So, and we don't really start companies unless we have this dynamic assured, or at least as best as we can. So we identify those areas where these life-altering technologies are important, where we know the interest of the strategics is there. We speak to them before we even start the companies. And then we capitalize on that enthusiasm, on the trend, and really devote our energies and the creativity of our teams to surpass the current players. And that's really what we do. So we don't really do any sales. We don't do any marketing. Our objective is to come up with the best technology possible, is to develop the first production line, is to establish the processes, to hire the best team possible with the right expertise to really accomplish the task, so that the acquirers can continue with that team, build on it, finish a clinical study for the FDA approval, and commercialize the product. And that's what we do. And we focus on interventional cardiology often, cardiovascular, because in that area, there are multiple large corporations that really need to compete. And in this industry, the big strategics cannot afford to wait. They cannot afford to miss out on an important segment, because if they're not top 2 or 3, they're going to be relegated to a very small market share, and often they don't even participate. So, and that's really what we count on. We count on this dynamic. If there's an original pioneer player that's sort of making headway, there has to be another couple, and we strive to become one of those companies that the strategics have to essentially acquire. They can afford to make an acquisition that doesn't work out, but they cannot afford to miss out on the full segment, because the value that they would be losing to their competitors is much more than a transaction price of an early stage company. So that is sort of what we aim to do. And in order to accomplish this, we focus on as best execution as possible, with dedicated teams and supported by a single G&A staff that takes care of human resources, finance and accounting, and so forth, and IP and facilities to service all the companies. But each company has its own CEO, and each company has a dedicated team that are all going to be part of a strategic. So the teams, the organization is established to essentially have those companies become part of a large strategic. They own, each one of them has their own facility, their own people, their own equipment. So they're really, from the beginning, designed to be, separate companies that become part of these larger organizations. And in order to facilitate and assure sort of success, usually the first year or so of the development of these companies is a process where it's essentially just my investment that is used to develop the business plan, the first hires, and the first intellectual property patent filings. So at the end of that year, we feel we would have accomplished the execution, so that every aspect of success has been sort of assured in the best way possible, so that when we invite external investors, people like Peter and other investors that work with us, they're likely to have a much likelier likelihood of success than otherwise. So we try to do the sort of the dirty work on our dime, and so that we can, cancel a project, change our mind, and then when we are complete with that early phase process and we are assured of success, we then invite external investors to participate in the investments, so that we can ultimately have a transaction at the end of that sort of effort. So that's generally what we do and how we function. Peter, is there anything that I missed that you want to sort of highlight?
Amr, if that's okay, I'd like now to go to the second part of the webinar and ask you to describe each portfolio companies that we're invested in, the 3 we're invested in, and the next 2 that we're already working on for this summer and later this year.
Okay, so the first one I'll talk about is Supira Medical. Supira Medical is a percutaneous heart pump company. So this is a device that is used by physicians during an interventional cardiology procedure. So when a patient has to have stents placed, some patients are very frail, or the location of the treatment is a very dangerous one where the physician suspects a potential heart arrest during the procedure. They often place these small pumps temporarily just during the procedure in case the heart arrests, and it allows the patient to be treated completely and properly. And then at the end of the procedure, you remove the pump. In case the heart arrests, the pump takes over, it's running, and there's no damage to the patient. And then eventually they restart the heart and remove the pump. The other usage for this device is for patients who have had a significant heart attack, and they're what they call in cardiogenic shock. The heart is weakened. It is not really able to sustain. And so those pumps are placed temporarily again, but in this case, for a few days or a week period, to allow the heart to basically pump with less vigor and therefore recover. And so the patients can leave the ICU and they're in a much better shape than otherwise. These devices sell from anywhere from $25,000 to $35,000. They're single use. And there is a company that provides this product to the industry today, and it's called Abiomed. They are selling $1 billion worth of pumps, and so far they're the only competitor in place. By the way, you've got Adona here. You want to switch back to the company called Supira.
Thank you, Amr. Sorry for that.
Yeah. So Supira is competing with Abiomed, which is the only company, you switched again, the only company that is in this market today. And we hope to be one of the first to be acquired. It's a very exciting project. We have made tremendous progress in our design. It is today getting ready to be used in patients later on in early fall, September timeframe. We have done, over 50 animals treated. So a very exciting product. We think our product is going to be the best in the industry. It's very interesting, compelling, much lower profile, higher flow, just a superior product. We didn't have to invent the whole procedure. Those guys did it. We just came up with a better device. So now let me switch over to another company. Okay, we'll talk about Akura. So okay. Akura is a company that is a thrombectomy catheter sort of effort. What we're trying to do here is really take the next leap forward in technology for catheters that remove blood clot from the lungs. So these are called pulmonary embolisms, as well as DVT, so deep vein thrombosis. So the treatment for these procedures is to remove the clot, but the most prevalent procedure is really to dissolve the clot by putting thrombolytics, drugs. And but more recently, there's a company that is public, it's called Inari, that has made really great strides in pushing and promoting a catheter that removes the blood clot, which has, there's a lot of evidence today that shows that removing a blood clot is better than dissolving it, especially if that patient is in a more sort of moderate or critical condition. And those are, in order for this treatment to work well, and the Inari device is a device that relies on a large diameter catheter, which is difficult to place and not as effective as we think our device is going to be. So we're trying to improve upon what they've done. They sell each one of those catheters for $10,000, so it's a high value. And it's high value because it really makes a huge difference on patients' outcomes. CMS raised the reimbursement just like they did for the pump. Often CMS is, it's counterintuitive. They pay more for certain technologies and procedures because if they're treated well with better technology, they save on the system in terms of therapies and length of stay in a hospital. Anyway, so Akura Medical is a better catheter to do this. We have a better a device, smaller, easier to track, safer to track through the heart up into the lungs, and it removes the clot in a single pass, allows the physicians to articulate, allows them to see what they're doing while they're treating and while they're removing the clot. And so we think it's going to be just a faster, superior product with better outcomes than what currently exists. So again, we didn't invent the procedure. We're just coming up with what we think are the best ways to do it, and the next generation of the category. We just fundraised for this company, and the team is really ramping things up, and they've done a couple animal studies, and things are getting really exciting for that company. Can you show the next slide, Peter?
Sure, Amr. Would you please talk about Adona in a few
Sure.
words? Is that okay? Thank you.
Yeah, so Adona Medical is a company that is really in the heart failure category. There's not a lot of great solutions for a very big population of patients who have heart failure. And often these patients have to go to the emergency room often. And so this product is sort of 2-in-1. It is a monitoring of the pressure in the left and the right side of the heart, continuous, remote, battery-powered system. The patient doesn't have to do much, but the pressures in the left and the right side are being translated into the cloud to the physician that allows the physician to monitor what's going on and prevent or anticipate what could happen to the patient, change the drug regimen, change the diuretics that the patient is on, increase the dosage or reduce it so that the patient does not really, end up in an emergency room. Simultaneously, this product has a shunt, which is a sort of a new, very exciting effort in heart failure, where for those patients that have congestive heart failure, where you can divert some of the flow from the left, which is a high pressure chamber, sort of left side of the heart, into the right side of the heart through a small hole in the septum, to reduce that load on the heart, and therefore reduce that higher blood pressure on the left and make things better for the patient in terms of how they feel and how they function. And so this is an interesting new development in the segment of treatment for patients. What's different about our device in this case is our ability to change the size of this orifice, of this shunt. The current technologies that are being studied in clinical trials right now don't have this ability to adjust, and therefore they're just single size for that patient for the duration of the treatment, which is unrealistic. Different patients require different hole sizes, but more importantly, throughout their lifespan, their conditions change, and sometimes they need the hole to be bigger or smaller, and our device will do this. And when you combine it with a continuous ability to monitor the pressure in the left and the right throughout the day and at night, without having the patient to, needing to put a wand or a device to collect the pressure, it happens automatically. Those two things together really are going to be a sort of a revolutionary way to do this treatment for these patients. This is a new category we think is really important in the treatment of congestive heart failure. And Adona is clearly a next generation technology and approach for this treatment and this procedure.
Thank you, Amr. So, sorry, did I interrupt you?
No, that's it.
So thank you, Amr. Now, you described the three companies, Supira, Akura, and Adona. I just want to mention that the fund is invested in all three of them as we speak. And now, if that's okay, Amr, could I ask you to speak about the next two? If you agree with that, I would start with Atia, please.
Sure. So Atia is a accommodating intraocular lens. So this is the largest market in ophthalmology. Most people, when they get older, end up needing to get a cataract. Basically, the lens in the eye stops functioning, becomes opaque, becomes stiff, and it needs to be replaced. So most of us know somebody who's had a cataract procedure. It's one of the most commonly done procedures in the world. And typically today you would get either a monofocal lens, so this is a single depth of focus lens, or a bifocal or trifocal lens. When you get a monofocal lens, most of the time the depth of focus is distance. So you will see very well distance, but if you want to read or look at the computer, you need to put glasses. And so in order to have it closer to what people would like to see and not have to put glasses, you end up with either bifocal or trifocal lenses. And those help, but they are discrete depth of focus. They're 2 different or 3 different level of focus areas, and it's accomplished by broken lenses. So the technology works in a way that it creates side effects. So you have halos and so forth, and so driving at night becomes difficult. So it has these optical aberrations, especially at night, which is not really ideal. What we are doing with a couple other companies is really restoring the normal behavior of the lens that a patient's brain expects. And so what the lens that we're developing is a fluid-filled lens, and the ciliary muscles and the zonules of the eye, stretch or squeeze the lens so it changes shape, and the fluid inside the lens is going to change the curvature of the lens, which means it's going to change the depth of focus. And so this is a sort of a continuous thing. It will continue to change the depth of focus just like the normal eye, so you wouldn't need glasses. This company has gotten into the clinic with the latest design. We've treated 7 patients. We're about to treat another set of patients in the coming months. So it's a very exciting time for us. And we're, this is sort of the earliest stage where we're fine tuning and understanding the device, and, so that we can essentially tweak this design so that we have the best outcomes. We've been speaking to strategics about this company, and there's a lot of excitement about our approach and how we're doing it, because we're differentiated relative to the competitors. We can remove one because it's a 2 lens system, and if we need to adjust the diopter for a particular patient, we can easily do it. So this really has a lot of solutions to the current existing problems in this industry. This part of the industry are called, this is the high end of the market, which is where a lot of the profits are generated for the large strategics in this industry. The lower end, monofocal lenses are covered by insurance. This is an out-of-pocket where all the profits come for the established players in this industry. So we're very excited. It's a very large market because it's not just for cataract patients, but as well as eventually this would be for presbyopia patients, for people who don't want to put glasses. And you could theoretically sort of address those patients. So a very large market, and we're in the early stage of clinical development and use in patients.
Thank you, Amr. So that will probably come for a Series C sometime in the summer. May I now please ask you to tell us a few words about Tioga?
Sure. So Tioga Cardiovascular is a company that is developing a mitral valve replacement, percutaneous and transeptal. So we've been involved and sold a company in the percutaneous aortic valve replacement space. This is the currently available catheter-based replacement for a valve, and that's in the aortic position. Today, that's standard. all over the world. And it's certainly shown itself to be fantastic for patients and really good for the industry. However, this is only for that aortic position that what currently is available on the market. What people are working on, including Tioga Medical, is the same kind of treatment, but for the mitral valve, because there's 4 different valves in the heart. The 2 most important valves are the aortic and the mitral. The mitral disease, there's more patients, many more patients that have the mitral disease than they do have the aortic. The aortic happened to be an easier technology to develop. It's a less complex anatomy to treat. The mitral, even though it's a bigger market, but it's also more difficult, and that's why it's happening at a later stage in our industry. And it presents a huge opportunity for the patients as well as for the industry. These devices will be selling in the range of $35,000 each. These are permanent implants. They have to work perfectly. I have to be tested extensively. And this company right now, Tioga, has been testing the product in the clinic, and not in the clinic, sorry, in chronic animals right now, and getting ready to get into the clinic in the next sort of 9 months to a year. So very complex, but very interesting and compelling technology that is being developed right now. We're using a 2-step process where we first put an anchor and then deploy a valve inside of it. And very exciting and big opportunity for this company. And this effort is very typical of what we do. This startup is the technologies that have been developed that are being sold today have all been acquired by startups, and this is following the same sort of approach where we're a startup, we're developing the technology, we're going to get it to the clinic, and ultimately we expect that there will be a sort of a interest amongst the strategics to acquire it in a competition and a bidding process for it. So we will be raising money for this company sometime next year.
Thank you, Amr. So you described the 3 companies we're invested in, the next 2 that we're very likely going to invest into. So that's great. Thank you for this description. I would like now to move to the Q&A, and we do have a number of interesting questions here on my screen. I would like, though, to start with the big elephant in the room and to ask you, Amr, sorry, I'm going to spend a minute to talk about this question because there are some details I want to get into, but how does the current market environment impact, these assets, the 3 that were already invested in and the next 2? And in particular, people asked me to ask you about the war in Europe, inflation, the Fed hiking rates, so that has a big impact. People are a little bit worried about the current market environment. In general, Amr, could you please tell us how this impacts the assets that we just talked about?
Yeah, I mean, it's, we're really removed from the day-to-day ups and downs of the market because we're not in any kind of, we don't sell anything, and we don't have metrics of how much, volume if patients have been treated and so forth. Those dynamics don't apply to companies, startups like ours. Our focus really is on technology development. What matters to our companies most is the ability to exit, the ability to have either a transaction with a large strategic or theoretically an IPO. But our strategy and what we do is really exit way before an IPO, because for an IPO, you need to be commercial. Usually we don't do that. We've never done that. What we focus on is selling those companies once we have the evidence. And the kinds of companies and products that we are working on are life-altering. So these are devices for procedures that are fundamental, that are needed regardless of what's going on with the economy, regardless of what's going on with wars or any of those types of things, or inflation. Sometimes if there's a COVID, some case treatments for patients gets delayed, but those sort of momentary or acute issues don't really impact our activities. We're in the early stage R&D effort, and the big companies that need our products for growth will make those transactions regardless if it's a bad or a good year, or if their sales are high or low, because when they're investing in us, they're investing for something that's not going to come through for another few years. So they look at it as a investment in their future. It's not an acute, they're not buying us for revenue, right? They're buying us for the future revenue. So we're probably, the least affected. I'm not going to say we're completely immune for what happens in the market, but we haven't seen that affect our outcomes. We haven't seen it affect the transactions and the signals and the conversations that are taking place in the industry. If you listen to Boston Scientific people and so forth, they still intend to do M&A transactions. They depend on it. They will continue to do it throughout this year and so forth. So I would say there's a delay to the effects that could happen to us. And in general, very little affects us on a day-to-day of what's going on, be it inflation, war, or COVID.
Okay, very interesting, Amr. Maybe a follow-up question. If the big strategic get under pressure, think about their share price being under pressure, PE re-rating, do you think this may impact, or do you think that them competing and wanting to buy assets will ultimately prevail?
I mean, I think it may affect the timing. I'm sure at some point it could, but it's also, they can't afford to let their competitors pick up the assets. I mean, when they're making a decision about buying one of our companies, they're looking in the future, and there's a lot more that relates to how important is that asset, when is it likely to go commercial, how de-risked is the technology. Those are the driving factors in making a decision. They cannot afford to miss out on the kinds of areas that we're interested in, because we're in the middle of what they intend and they need in order to really grow and compete with their peers. They can't afford to just ignore it. They can delay a transaction perhaps if they think that they can afford to. But if they think that others are going to acquire it instead of them, they really wouldn't. And also the kind of price they're paying for, they're not paying $5 billion for our companies. I'd like it, but that's not our model. They're paying in the hundreds. And that's something they can afford, but what cannot afford is not have the assets and miss out on billions in revenue, a few years down the road. So it's really, they need it for their business. And when they're making these transaction decisions, it's about the future, and they can't afford to just ignore it. So that's what we've seen happen, and that's the indications for now. I'm sure eventually, if the whole industry is really affected for significant periods, it may dampen the excitement or slow things down a little bit. But so far, we haven't seen it.
Last question about this topic, Amr. Have you, in the lifetime of Shifamed, experienced difficult periods? We're talking, you're in California, we're in Europe. I'm thinking, for example, 2011 was a pretty difficult time in Europe or so. Has there been in your history a time where financing or selling companies was more difficult?
Well, those are years where we actually had exits.
Okay.
So, and during COVID, we sold a company to J&J called Novera, which was a really great outcome for our investors. We were really concerned that it was going to slow us down. We were able to treat patients using Zoom. We were able to do it without even being in the hospital room in Paraguay. Ultimately, our CEO was able to travel to Europe, do cases. It was attended by the J&J people, and ultimately they acquired the company. So we thought that the sky was falling. In reality, it didn't, and we had one of our better exits. In 2011, also we sold Akura Medical. So I have not seen this, a strong correlation between what's going on externally on the macroeconomic sort of level and what we're doing, because we're in general, we are a little bit removed from the market. We're not about, if we were selling companies where they're completely creative to the strategics, bottom line immediately, well, that'd be a different story. But that's not what we do. They're assuring their future when they do the acquisitions of companies like ours. They have to do that regardless. They cannot afford to let their competitors acquire.
Thank you, Amr. Now I'm going to turn my attention to the questions coming from the audience. There's two questions about the key man risk. Talking about yourself, Amr, could you please tell us a few words how you mitigate this at Shifamed?
Yeah, I mean, you have to realize that we have 7 companies in the portfolio. I'm not running every company. As a matter of fact, I'm running none of the companies. I happen to be chairman. There's a CEO for each entity, each company. They have their dedicated teams of specialists that are really focused on each company. And those teams are going to be part of a larger organization. This is part of what we do. I would say, a guide. I give advice and so forth. And the team that we have that support the activities of all these companies is it's a team of 6 people, right? So they're doing the CFO work, they're doing the business development and transaction work, they're doing the facilities, the human resources, the IP, the corporate legal, and all that kind of stuff. So I am part of a system. I'm not really, if I were not to be there, I don't think it would affect the current companies. It may affect future companies, perhaps, but the current companies, once they're up and running, they have a business plan, they have budgets, they have people executing on what needs to take place. There's patent filings have taken place. So they're marching and they're moving forward, regardless if I'm around or not.
Thank you, Amr. I'm going to now turn my eyes on my screen to read a question here. Apologies for that. We have one question going. As a fast follower, do you ever encounter any IP infringement issues? Or is it innovation that is significantly different from the pioneers?
So this is, I would say, one of our strengths, and it's also one of our biggest challenges, right? We are often, most of the time, are in competitive, difficult scenarios with very complicated patent landscapes that we're trying to navigate through. But we're comfortable with that. This is how we spend the first year identifying the path forward so that we can fund the companies. This is the world we live in. We thrive on competition, and we deal with those sort of difficult IP landscapes. And we've been in situations, for example, for Sadra that we sold to Boston. This is the Picatinny aortic valve. We did a really good job with the IP, avoided all the issues, and ultimately, instead of being sued by Edwards, Boston Scientific was able to leverage our IP and actually sue Edwards and win. So not that we're always towing, sometimes it's a very close sort of call, sometimes we're on the edge, but we've prevailed. We have a very robust process. We have numerous attorneys on the inside dedicated, as well as on the outside working on this, that are working hand in hand with each team day in and day out, and they meet weekly. And so I don't think anybody spends as much time on IP as we do, because that is part of what we're supposed to do. We get into these interesting and, by definition, competitive and complicated IP landscapes. But we've done a good job. We continue to do a good job with that, and that is part of what we do.
Thank you, Amr. I have 2 more questions. I'm going to try. The next one is about supply disruptions. In terms of raw material suppliers, is there anything in the current environment that you can say about this, Amr, please?
Yeah, I mean, this is a problem that it started being a small problem, continues to be a problem, is getting to be a bigger problem. I think it's across industries and certainly has affected our industry as well. However, we've raised, good amounts of money. We're able to buy well ahead of time. And because we have an ecosystem of multiple companies, if one company learns something, the others quickly follow and take advantage of that. Our CEOs and myself, we meet weekly, and we're always discussing whatever topic it may be. More recently, a lot has been discussed about supply chain issues. Sometimes we talk about FDA, sometimes we talk about the environment, whatever it is. So definitely supply chain is becoming more and more of a topic. However, we are managing where we have abilities to work with our vendors. We sometimes will pool our resources and work with vendors. So we act like as if we were a large company, even though we're small companies. But the collection of small companies gives us quite a bit of leverage, and we've been taking advantage of that. So far, we haven't seen it affect our outcomes, and we're staying on top of it, and we're sort of continue to sort of monitor the situation very closely. I think supply chain issues are more of a problem if you're an individual small startup. But in our current sort of setup with multiple portfolio companies that are well funded, it's much less of a problem. And so far, it really hasn't changed anything for us. But you never know.
Thank you, Amr. Next question is about the exit. When the big strategic get involved, is it more upfront, or are there also milestones payments upon reaching milestones?
So we try to get as much upfront as possible. There's always a risk that certain milestones are not met for various reasons. But sometimes we have to live with milestones, and often our deals have milestone payments associated with them. Sometimes the milestones happen while we're closing the transaction or soon after. So, I think given that we sell early, it's going to be hard to say that we're not going to have milestones. It's almost guaranteed that we'll always have some milestone payments associated with our transactions. We try to, negotiate as best as possible to reduce those and have more of the upfront as possible, as much as possible. But that's a negotiation that has to take place. Sometimes we succeed. Often we have milestone payments that we have to sort of expect.
Excellent. I'll try to rush with two more questions and then we'll cut it short. One question that is very, very exciting. Who's Shifamed main competitors?
So there's other groups that form and start companies, but none of them work the way we do. The way that other groups do things is they put one company, move it forward, and another company and move it forward, and they're independent. They're not operated under single management. That's how typically the industry has done things. We've decided to operate slightly differently, and really having a common G&A function and operating all the companies on a single campus. So nobody's doing that, but there's a number of groups that have multiple startups in series, groups like Incept, like the Foundry, and so forth. But there's not many groups that are certainly in the areas that we're in that have done this, and we're certainly one of the well-known groups in this area.
Thank you, Amr. And the last question, if there's any other coming up, we'll do them offline by email. But the question is about how do you value companies at these early stages? How do you value Series A, B, and C for your companies from the perspective of Shifamed?
Yeah, it's a negotiation, right? When we get our investors to come and invest, we negotiate with them. So that, if every one of our transactions, every one of our financings for each of the companies is an independent event and a negotiated set of terms that get agreed upon, and then we execute the financing. It's not very complicated. There are standards in our industry, and we look at, our investors look at that, we look at that, and we negotiate a fair price that, that everybody agrees is reasonable.
Excellent. Well, Amr, I guess it's time now to draw to a conclusion here. I want to take this opportunity to thank you again. I think from my perspective, it's been very exciting to hear it from yourself. I'm always very keen to get all our investors and prospects to hear it from yourself. And I think we did a great use of your time. So thank you, Amr. From our perspective, we've updated the whole team and all our investors and prospects. Things are going pretty well, as you've heard, and we're obviously gonna look to do a second close for the fund sometime late in June. We'll reach out, obviously. Amr, again, thank you very much. Thank you for answering all these questions. Thanks for all the participants.
Thank you. Have a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.